In this thesis, it was decided to analyze the fundamental role of translation, interpretation, and audiovisual adaptation in the promotion of cultural globalization throughout the centuries. The periods that have been taken into consideration are the ancient times, the early Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, colonialism, the 20th century, and contemporary history. The thread of the work instead will be given respectively by historical notions, the great exploration and the discovery of America, the third space of enunciation and the first form of cultural globalization, how globalization fought censorship and the latest evolution of the three disciplines. At the dawn of the early Middle Ages, humanity knew the first translator and the greatest of his time, Saint Jerome. This man, by translating the Bible from Hebrew to Latin, unconsciously contributed to the cultural globalization that would take place many centuries later. Sometime later, even the Protestant Luther emphasized the importance of Saint Jerome's work. Interpreters were less lucky. In the antiquity they had an honorable role, but they were rarely mentioned. The few mentions they had are mainly thanks to the good heart of Herodotus and Cicero. In the late Middle Ages, translation also managed to reach other languages. The concept of vulgarization was created in order to define the translation of a work both from Latin or from other languages. Later, these practices were called vertical and horizontal translation. Another factor that certainly helped the cultural diffusion in the world of translation was the invention of printing by Gutenberg in 1440. This revolutionary practice foraged the globalizing aspect of culture because it allowed the most important books to have not only a translation but even a print run. Finally, the end of the late Middle Ages was a real golden age for interpreting. Thanks to the discovery of America in 1492 and the great travelers of the time, the figure of the sworn interpreter saw the light of the day, even though it was a profession much more devoted to commerce than the one we know. During colonialism, many nations were populated by colonies from other countries, and the literature pieces from those nations were often reworked by translators who adapted them to European culture, losing much of their folklore. As in the case of Arthur Ryder, translator of the Panchatantra, an Indian vernacular text. Many centuries later, Homi Bhabha, professor at Harvard University, will establish the existence of a third space of enunciation, a kind of limbo in which two or more cultures should be put in order to communicate so as not to prevail over each other. However, the translators of the time were not aware of this rule and ended up eliminating a lot of information that the art of translation should have preserved. This was a crucial mistake for the professional of the time. One of the biggest protests about this attitude was made by the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe during the period when also Nigeria was colonized by the United Kingdom. The writer questioned the fact that European cultural canons had to be the best ones to follow when importing literary material. The 20th century was marked by a great global progress but also by immense dark periods. The old continent was devastated by many dictatorships that compromised its stability. The dictatorships jeopardized the development of a common culture through instruments that aimed at cutting international relations. In this context, Italian censorship severely hit the world of translation. Lady Chatterley's Lover, Murder on the Orient Express, and God's Little Acre, which were imported works that touched peculiar themes, were particularly hit by these measures. For what concerns interpretation, at the end of the First World War, the Peace Conference in Paris in 1919 was the first international testbed for the technique of consecutive interpreting, which was already taking hold in diplomatic circles. In order to witness the international appearance of simultaneous interpretation and the officialization of the profession of interpreter, it was necessary to wait until the Nuremberg trials. The worldwide importance of the event underlined the relevance of interpretation. Moreover, In the 20th century, audiovisual adaptation was also created, and it appeared for the first time through the intertitles, a basic version of the subtitles that reported information only in the language in which the film had been shot. This one was not an easy period, since the Ministry of Popular Culture censored all the non-Italian material, cutting off bridges with various cultures or foreign folklore. It was precisely that folklore, however, that in the 40s revived the market. Fox and Warner Bros., newly founded, supported Italy thanks to an avant-garde technique, dubbing. In the contemporary historical period, the world population and the diffusion of the various cultures experienced a boom. Also, in order to honor all the translators, September the 30th was established International Translation Day. Interpreting, on the other hand, is still a constantly developing sector. In the 60s, the job of community interpreter appeared in Australia in order to face the considerable migration flow coming from Europe. As a result, associations have been established in many countries to regulate the work of community interpreters. In Europe, this profession is not so taken into consideration. Sweden, for example, has already developed training courses dedicated to this discipline, while other countries like Ireland have not yet officially recognized this profession. It is probably only a matter of time since many relevant names in Europe will be in favor of this new job. One of them is Franz Bohacker, professor at the University of Vienna. The adaptation sector has given Italy many talents in the dubbing sector, such as Francesco Pannofino, Luca Ward, and Ferruccio Amendola. After the period of the dictatorship, the sector has gradually recovered until it became globally appreciated. Even the two main disciplines have been able to evolve thanks to technologies belonging to other countries. Thanks to this type of sharing, it is now possible to perform dubbing and subtitling in a much more qualitative and professional way. In Europe, not all countries rely completely on dubbing. Over the years, the States of the Union generated two blocks. The first one is made up of countries that rely on subtitling, including Hungary, Belgium, and Greece, while the other one relies on dubbing, including Spain, Italy, and France. The demonstration of the fruitfulness of international collaboration lies in the fact that today, thanks to progress, it is possible to benefit from subtitles in almost all languages on platforms such as Netflix and YouTube. In this dissertation, it has been observed that cultural globalization has been fostered by linguistic mediation over the centuries. Moreover, as George Steiner said, without translation we would live in provinces bordering on silence.